Hey everybody, Jim here. Welcome back for another exciting edition of Show Reviewkin', and today we are taking a look at an almost totally forgotten Konami arcade classic. It's called Mystic Warriors, and luckily we don't have to do it alone today because we have a special guest reviewer. So everybody prepare yourselves because here comes BoxerB 64K.
Here comes a new challenger!
Mystic Warriors Way of the Ninjas was a side-scrolling running gun or hack and slash released by Konami in 1993 for the arcades. This game came out during the Konami Golden Run, as I like to call it, released right after hit, including Lethal Enforcers, G.I. Joe, Sunset Riders, Turtles in Time, and The Simpsons. Mystic Warriors simply got lost in that mad shuffle of these popular titles, at least in my opinion, which is a real shame as it's a quality title right up there with Konami's best. Adding more to its obscurity is the fact that it never got any home ports, and it was released on Konami's Mystic Warriors arcade board, which only saw about 6 games released, all of them as obscure as this one, with great titles like the side-scrolling beat-em-up Violence Storm, and the equally as cool Metamorphic Force, all fading into obscurity just like Mystic. But let's flip on over to the game now, which sees a demented organization named Skull Enterprises who is single-handedly taking over the world with their ninja forces. Naturally, of course, it's like something out of an 80s ninja exploitation flick, a genre I watched way too much of as a kid. You get to pick one of 5 different ninjas to use in the game. After that, one is selected randomly to get kidnapped by Skull, with your goal to get your fellow ninja back intact. The game pretty much plays out like Sunset Riders, just swapping out ninjas and shurikens instead of guns and dynamite, and was actually put together by the same Konami team who did that much-loved arcade classic. You run along lobbing shurikens, slicing and dicing if enemies get too close, and you can pick up shinobi-style screen killer powers that kill everyone on screen, plus shields and plenty of health pickups, all your standard tropes for the genre. Nothing new, but still done with a lot of attention to detail and plenty of sight gags to add to its personality. I just love the Sunset Riders intro being played in the drive-in segment of the first level, and the ridiculously cheesy pieces of dialogue spoken by the boss characters.
Where is our friend? Poor guy. Your comrade is now...
There's nothing as cool as Sunset Riders,
Marry me with my money.
but still plenty of chuckles to be had. The game has 9 stages in total and flips between straightforward run-and-gun style affairs with also fast-paced little mini-games like skiing and riding logs down a river, to those all-important big old boss fights, which are all different gameplay-wise for each encounter. The environments and animation are really cool, colorful, and jump all over the place as you make your way to Skull headquarters to take out the head honcho. My favorite sections include the skiing minigame and jumping from plane to plane in the sky as you take out hordes of ninjas. The game's plot also has a really cool little twist halfway through, which sends the second half of the game into a full-on revenge plot. But if you haven't played it before, I'll let you enjoy that little twist for yourself. The music is also of special note, with really fast-paced toe tappers done by Yuji Takanuichi and Junya Nakano. They both did the score for Konami's awesome X-Men arcade, as well as Yuji doing Space Manbo on the MSX and Junya's cool score on Square's Front Mission Gun Hazard. This game is an absolute blast to play, with the original arcade coming in both standard 2-player and 4-player configurations, obviously bumping up the chaos element of the game significantly if played with more people. When the game landed in April of '93, it hit the number 9 spot on the Japanese arcade listings, but faded out pretty quickly after that. But thanks to emulation being so easily available now, there's still many ways to play this overlooked gem, and I encourage you to give it a go. It's a nice bit of lost Konami arcade history.
For starters, I really have to thank BoxerB 64K for choosing Mystic Warriors for this review, because I'd actually never played it before and wasn't really familiar with it at all. With as much time as I spend in arcades, you'd think I would have come across it at least once, but no, I had to go and grab a ROM from AIM, but oh boy am I glad I did, because this game kicks some serious ass, making me wonder why it wasn't more popular. I think our guest is right when he theorizes that it just got lost in the shuffle of all those great licensed arcade games that Konami was pumping out at the time, because honestly, it is kind of hard to stand out when you're up against games like TMNT, The Simpsons, and X-Men. Regardless, this game was an absolute blast. It actually reminded me of another great ninja arcade action game that I absolutely love, which is Ninja Commando, a top-down run-and-gun ninja game developed by ADK for Neo Geo hardware, but I honestly think Mystic Warriors tops that game. It really does feel like an amalgamation of Sunset Riders and Shinobi, which is a concept that pretty much sells itself. It features fast-paced, exciting gameplay, up to 4-player co-op, vibrant visuals, and a fantastic soundtrack. I don't usually like to use the cliche of calling a game a hidden gem, but it certainly does apply here. If you've never tried Mystic Warriors before, go out of your way to play it, because it's awesome. So thank you again to BoxerB64K for joining me on this review and for picking such an amazing game. He makes some outstanding videos, and definitely go and check out his channel for more great retro gaming content. Thanks for watching, everyone, and we'll see you next time on Show Review Kit.
Awesome!
Hey everybody, I hope you're ready to get bossa nova today, because we're taking a look at what is undoubtedly the best beat-em up ever. Or was the best beat-em up ever. Whatever the case may be, today we're in for a good time, because we are talking about the one and only TMNT Turtles in Time for the Super Famicom, SNES, and with the recent release of the Cowabunga Collection, it's also available on the Nintendo Switch and PS4, so now, more than ever, we can all get our fix of time-traveling terrapins beating the brains out of a legion of felonious foot soldiers, rampaging robots, and mischievous mutated menaces. And when I reach for the alliteration, you know we're dealing with a true classic, so let's dig a little deeper and find out what makes Turtles in Time such an amazing game. For starters, we have to make the comparison to the arcade original, because after all, back in the 16-bit days, whether it was a fighting game, a shoot-em-up, or a beat-em-up, you'd pretty much always rather be playing the arcade version. In the case of Turtles in Time, the arcade game obviously features superior graphics and the inclusion of 4-player co-op, which is insanely fun, while the SNES version only offers 2-player co-op, which is still incredibly fun, but obviously, with the hardware limitations, you wouldn't be able to include 4 turtles and a bunch of enemies all at the same time without making the game basically unplayable. However, the SNES version makes up for this with more stages, more boss characters, and incorporating Mode 7 in some instances, such as the first Shredder boss fight and the redesigned Neon Knight Rider stage. Also, it has to be said that the soundtrack in Turtles in Time, regardless of which version you're playing, is amazing. One of my all-time favorites, in fact, and it depends on your taste. If you prefer the sound of the arcade or the console version, I myself tending to lean more towards the console. There's just something about the SNES sound chip that I feel really makes these songs in particular sound just a little bit better. If I had to choose an overall favorite between the two, though, I'd still have to go with the SNES. It's the game that I've played the most, beating it countless times over the years and still somehow never getting bored with it, and all of the additions over the arcade version, even though there's no 4-player co-op, still makes me a bigger fan of the console port. But there is another. Right around the same time we got our precious SNES port of Turtles in Time, Konami released another very similar Turtles game for the Sega Genesis, and that was TMNT, the Hyperstone Heist. And with the nature of the console wars at the time, there was the inevitable debate over which game was better, and clearly it's simply a matter of opinion, but I am squarely in the SNES camp. The major advantage of Hyperstone Heist is the inclusion of a run button, which speeds up the gameplay a bit, and it's definitely preferable to either the auto run or double tap of Turtles in Time. But other than that, the core gameplay is basically the same, except that Hyperstone Heist has significantly fewer stages, fewer boss battles, and overall just less variety in the gameplay, which has me getting bored with it eventually, whereas that never happens with the SNES game. I'm still not bored with that game, and it's like 30 years later. Also, Turtles in Time overall has a much nicer look. It's more colorful, and the visuals just pop more, if that makes any sense. And the soundtrack sounds a lot better coming out of the SNES. I mean, no Neon Knight Riders? That's a crime. The Genesis never had a chance. Still a great beat-em-up, but Hyperstone Heist falls well short of Turtles in Time, in my humble opinion. Of course, with the advent of the Cowabunga Collection, you can enjoy both games back-to-back and make up your own mind. So, in summation, Turtles in Time for decades held the mantle of best beat-em-up of all time. There were plenty of competitors at the time, like Streets of Rage and Final Fight, but for me, none of them could hold a candle to those time-hopping Teenage Turtles. Now, though, many years later, that's all changed. These modern beat-em-ups are really something special, and it looks like it's time for a new king to be crowned, with games out there like Final Vendetta, Double Dragon Neon, Streets of Rage 4. I suppose it was inevitable that I'd find a new favorite eventually, but which of these retro reimagined brawlers could possibly overthrow our 4 heroes in a half shell? I'll need to do some serious research to come up with an answer, so until next time, stay green, everybody.
Hey everybody, Jim here. Welcome back for another exciting edition of Show Rebukin', where today we are taking a look at one of Capcom's lesser celebrated arcade fighters. It's called Red Earth, and we have a very special guest to help us with this one today. So everyone, prepare your minds, your bodies, and your souls for Retro Snow.
Here comes a new challenger.
No mercy. Attack.
Hey guys, and welcome back to yet another episode. Today, we're going to take a look at Red Earth, also known as Warzard in Japan, released to us back in 1996 by the good folks at Capcom. Cool little bit of trivia regarding Red Earth, it's actually the very first game developed for Capcom's then new CPS-3 system, with Street Fighter III following suit the next year. It's also one of those games that never saw a proper home release until just recently in 2022, thanks to the release of Capcom Fighting Collection. So what makes Red Earth stand out? Let's dive in and take a look. You may think from looking at it that it's just your standard 1 versus 1 fighting game, but that it definitely is not. Oddly enough, Red Earth is primarily meant to be played single player thanks to its quest mode, where the player is tasked with taking out a series of humongous bosses throughout the game world, all while gaining experience points, leveling up, getting new moves and weapons, etc. This is cool too, since the equipment on your character actually changes its appearance. I always enjoy that, it kind of reminds me of Knights of the Round in that way.
Bit of a strange design choice for an arcade game, sure, but I can kind of get what they were going for here. This game is simply a showpiece of the CPS-3 hardware.
You've got a whopping 4 characters to choose from here, with this game also being the very first appearance of Tessa. The real bummer with this is that there are like 8 bosses that you fight, and none of them are playable in the versus mode. Yep, just those initial 4. The visuals are where Red Earth really struts its stuff. Capcom wanted to go big, and they sure as hell did. All the characters and bosses are enormous with lots of frames of animation. The setup is a little weird, with the boss's health bar being located at the bottom of the screen. It's huge too, but the boss fights are all only 1 round anyway, so they go by pretty quick. The AI in the game can be a real pain in the ass. They love to spam the same moves over and over, and some can even take down a good 50% of your health bar in just 1 shot. It's a quarter muncher, no doubt about it. To further exemplify that, you don't even get a full health bar for each fight. It's solely based on how well you performed in the previous one and how much of a bonus that you got. Red Earth uses your standard Street Fighter style 6-button setup with 3 punches and 3 kicks, all of varying strength. The special moves themselves are performed, again, not unlike Street Fighter, using quarter and half circles with combinations of either button. Each character has a few standard special moves that they start with, but several more can be earned as that character levels up, along with attack power, resistances, and more. Unlocking the moves is a really cool feature, made even more awesome thanks to the game's password system, which allows you to pick right back up at whatever level you left at, with all of your unlockables ready to use. Pretty sweet. You'll notice treasure chests on the ground from time to time. These can be broken by swinging at them, and they do contain items like orbs and even some health recovery at times. The orbs themselves work almost just like they do in Pocket Fighter, if you remember that one. When picked up, they sit right below your health bar and can be used by doing a quarter circle back and hitting all 3 punches.
Oh, and let me tell you, these things can be a real game changer in Red Earth too, especially being that you can cast several of them in a row. Not only do they do a decent amount of damage, but they also help to put a little bit of space between you and your opponent.
No mercy. Attack!
One thing you may not have expected to see here are finishers. If you manage to hit your opponent with a special move to end the fight, you can cut them in half and or chop off limbs, among other things. Pretty rare for Capcom. The music is all pretty good as well, but nothing here is as memorable as anything from like Darkstalkers or Street Fighter. Red Earth is cool for like a playthrough or 2 at the most. I can totally see why the game didn't get a home release back in the day. There's just not a whole lot to it. Sure, the graphics are awesome to look at, but imagine paying like $50 for this on the Dreamcast. I know I'd feel a little bit ripped off unless they added a host of new content and, of course, made the bosses playable in Versus. The fights are over quickly and the AI is really annoying a lot of the time. Don't get me wrong, I do enjoy Red Earth here and there, but it's just okay. Still worth a run through just to check out the character and stage designs.
Before we leave, I'd like to say a big thank you to Jim for having me back on the channel. As always, thanks for watching, commenting, and of course subscribing. And until next time, stay classic.
Red Earth, aka Warzerd here in Japan, which, since I mentioned it, is a much cooler title in my opinion and should probably be the name of a power metal band, but I digress. This is a game that I actually never had the opportunity to play until it was released as part of the Capcom Fighting Collection, because even for someone who spends a decent amount of time at the arcade, this isn't a title that you'll come across very often, and it is understandable why, because, as Bracy mentioned, this isn't really a competitive fighting game, but feels more like Capcom experimenting with some new hardware and a new concept. A fighting game RPG hybrid, if you will, which is indeed interesting, but lacks the staying power of games like Street Fighter and Darkstalkers. This is the type of game that you play through a couple of times, you have your fun, and then you jump over to something else. Being able to play as the various boss characters would have been great, but the only way to do that is by playing Capcom Fighting Jam, oddly enough, and I'm not terribly inclined to do that. For what it's worth, though, the gameplay in Warzerd is really fun while it lasts, and the visuals are excellent. There are some cool little Easter eggs too. For example, Leo strikes a lot of the same poses as Conan the Barbarian, which gave me a kick. Conan being my favorite barbarian and all things considered, Warzerd or Red Earth, whichever you prefer, is well worth playing. If you're a Capcom fan, get it on MAME or grab the Capcom Fighting Collection and have yourself a knockout good time. A huge thank you to Bracy for joining me for this review. Seriously, one of my favorite people on YouTube, and I highly recommend visiting his channel if you want to see a lot of retro gaming goodness. Thanks for watching, everyone, and we'll see you next time on Show Reviewkin.
Awesome!
Your fist and not your mouth. This is the black soul. Put it in your middle finger and sing along. Use your fist and not your mouth.
Hey yo everybody, and welcome to the first edition of Show Review Den. Dennis here, and today we're taking a look at a game featuring one of my all-time favorite characters from Todd McFarlane's legendary comic book, Spawn. Now to this day, Spawn is killing it on the comic book front, but during the height of his popularity in the 90s, he went on to spawn a successful toy line, a top-notch animated series, a questionable live-action movie, and appeared in a number of video games. The best being Capcom's arcade game, but nothing has come close to delivering a true-to-form Spawn experience as Spawn Armageddon.
My only memory is the burning of flesh.
The story presented here is straightforward and inspired from the first 100 issues of the comic book. Now, our protagonist, for the unfamiliar, is the former assassin Al Simmons, betrayed and murdered by his employer and sent to hell, where he sold his soul to the devil. In exchange, he would get to once again see his wife Wanda. The devil honored the deal, returning Simmons to Earth, but of course, there's a catch. Simmons returned 5 years later as a hellspawn, and the love of his life had remarried. In the midst of searching for answers, he becomes caught up in a war between heaven and hell.
The love that was taken from me by the Prince of Hell. It was easy. You're my bitch.
Let's talk about the gameplay. The combat in particular is the best part and is in the vein of Devil May Cry. A good fit for Spawn, I feel, which is only exemplified by the fact that Spawn has more emphasis on the gunplay. Now, critics back in the day heavily criticized the game for not being as smooth as those other hack and slashers, and that's true to an extent. The animations can feel a little more stiff, especially at first, and there isn't much combo variety. However, to this game's benefit, instead of your attacks being fast and flighty, they made your attacks weighty and powerful, slamming your axe down on demons or blasting them into pieces with your nectoplasm. Or my favorite thing to do, ripping them apart with your chains, which is satisfying as all hell. Armageddon features a lengthy campaign with around 25 missions to complete. After each one, you're scored based on how many enemies you killed, collectibles you uncovered, and other various factors. And it's also here where you can upgrade Spawn using all the souls that you collected from demons. They can be used to boost his health or nectoplasm, buy ammo, or upgrade his massive arsenal. And you have a hell of a lot of guns to play around with. Machine guns, shotguns, rocket launchers, you name it. In addition to blowing things up with your nectoplasm, you can also use it to give yourself a temporary shield, a speed boost, or unleash Hell's Fury for some decent damage. Each mission is almost arcade-like in nature, and I actually think it would have been a bit better had they gone fully in that direction, since you're hardly doing any platforming anyway, and the platforming you are doing is not all that great. The missions get pretty brutal too, with random difficulty spikes and a lack of checkpoints in certain spots. But outside of those times, the game isn't overly difficult. The visual presentation holds up pretty well. Now, admittedly, I did play on PC to get it nice and clean, and for the convenience of capturing this footage. But here you can see the original PS2 and the Xbox versions, and the PS2 version is a bit blurrier and more jaggy, while the Xbox version does have smoother textures and is looking pretty crispy. Now, the level designs themselves aren't anything special, but they are pretty befitting as they have you going through places like the back alleys of New York City to hell itself. The atmosphere is lacking in some areas, but it is colorful and moody, and I actually do like these cool, trippy lighting effects. Some of the other details are awesome, like how your axe becomes drenched in blood after kicking demon ass. After all, it wouldn't be Spawn without the excessive violence. The music. This is where I was a little disappointed. The best track in the game is the intro featuring Marilyn Manson, and I'm typically not into his music, but I wish the rest of the game had that sound. Instead, what we got here is a poor man's Sonic Mayhem. Generic guitar loops with no build, no catchy riffs, nothing that amplifies the action on screen. Even in boss battles, the music remains flat and at best serviceable. With the worst part of the presentation out of the way, the best part is the fact that the legendary actor Keith David reprised his role as Spawn. Having voiced him in the awesome HBO animated series, it goes without saying he did a bang-up job. The man's voice is synonymous with Spawn.
What the hell are you? Spawn.
Overall, there's a decent game in Spawn Armageddon if you have the patience to find it. Being a fan of the character, though, really is the driving factor here. Even then, the lack of polish will be felt, and you can't help but wonder what this game could have been had it been in more capable hands. The Devil May Cry formula is actually a perfect match, I feel, so I do like the approach they took. The heavy attacks and gunplay serve the character well too. Exploding enemies and seeing the bits and pieces fly as you rip them to shreds. I just would have liked to see them go even further with it. Go all in making Spawn a powerhouse. Forget about the combos completely and spongy enemies, and just have more stylish kill animations and some devastating killing blows with the axe. Still though, I had fun playing through the game. If you like action games, this one might be worth a look. For the unacquainted, it's pretty average, with some interesting ideas. For comic book fans, and especially Spawn fans, it's excellent.
Everybody, Jim here. Welcome back for another exciting edition of Show Review, and where today we're taking a look at one of my personal favorite puzzle games ever. It's called Yoshi no Panepon. You might know it better as Tetris Attack, and we have another outstanding guest reviewer helping us out today. So everybody, prepare yourselves, because here comes Zuby.
Here comes a new challenger!
Hello guys, so this is Zuby from Zuby's Game Room, and I'm going to be talking about Yoshi no Panepon. So this game, just a little bit of a background, I got this game from when I was in Japan. So we had a get together with my mom's cousin, or my mom's relatives, and one of the ladies who was my mom's cousin brought me this game for Game Boy, because Game Boy was the thing back then, in the 90s. So I was super excited because, you don't really get new games that often when you're this young. So I was excited to play this game, and I was never good at it. It was one of the few games that I was given that I didn't ask for. So I guess my mom's cousin thought that, I would enjoy it. So she got me the game, and I was very excited. And I later found out that this game was never released outside of Japan, and that this was like a port of a game that was only in the US called Tetris Attack. So as you might already know, Tetris Attack is not like Tetris, and it plays very differently since you don't have any dropping pieces, like vertically dropping pieces. You start off with the pieces already on the bottom, and then you have to rearrange the tiles, which keeps piling up, so that you match 3 or more tiles of the same type by switching them around, switching places. So this was the first time I played a puzzle game that wasn't like Puyo Puyo or Tetris that drops from the top down to the bottom. This one already had the pieces on the field, and you had to rearrange them. And I thought it was very cool because Yoshi is cute. I didn't know about Yoshi that much back then, so I don't know the characters, or I didn't know about the characters, but I still enjoyed it. It was the first time I played a game like this with Yoshi, and because I never had a Yoshi game, this was my first Yoshi game. So yeah, and of course it's on the Game Boy, so it doesn't look as good as the American version on the Super Nintendo, but I think it's still worth checking out if you're looking for like Japanese exclusive Game Boy games or cute looking Game Boy games, or if you like puzzle games.
First of all, I want to give a big thank you and shout out to Zuvi for joining me today. She's someone I've been following on YouTube for a long time, and she has a very deep knowledge of Japanese games, which I guess is why she chose Yoshi no Panepon for today's review, because initially I mistakenly thought she was referring to Panepon, aka Tetris Attack. But a little bit of a history lesson, because this series is just a tiny bit confusing. The first game in the series was called Panepon, and it was published in Japan by Nintendo in 1995. In 1996, it was ported to North America, and just like when Nintendo converted Puyo Puyo into Kirby's Avalanche, Panepon became Tetris Attack and featured Yoshi and other Super Mario characters instead of the characters created for Panepon. Then Nintendo ported Tetris Attack back to Japan for the Satellaview, a gaming broadcast service similar to the Sega channel, and changed the title to Yoshi no Panepon, and after that they released a Game Boy version only in Japan, also called Yoshi no Panepon, and here we are. If you ask me, the best games on the Game Boy have always been the puzzle games. They're perfect for gaming on the go, and even among such a plethora of great puzzle games like Tetris, Puyo Puyo, and Kirby Kira Kira Kids, this stands out as potentially the best puzzler on the console. If you're already familiar with Tetris Attack, the gameplay here is the exact same. As the screen continually scrolls upward, you swap the various tiles around to match them up, create combos, and clear them from the screen. It's a very simple premise and very fun and addictive, as any good puzzle game should be. It's a Game Boy game, so you won't be too blown away by the visuals or anything, but the usage of Mario characters such as Yoshi, Bowser, and Lakitu is a nice addition for Nintendo fans, and the sound design is really good with a pretty decent soundtrack and very Game Boy-esque sound effects that'll certainly touch a nostalgic nerve. Indeed, all things considered, this is an awesome puzzle game that if you're a fan of the genre, you should definitely give a try. So thank you again to Zuvi for joining me today. Go and have a look at her channel, Zuvi's Game Room, for more great gaming videos. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and we'll see you next time on Show Reviewkin'. Hey everybody, welcome back for another 16-bit shooting edition of Show Reviewkin', where today we are taking a look at what some people call the greatest 16-bit shooter ever made, and they just might be right, because it's Gaiares on the Sega Mega Drive and Genesis, and if it's not the best 16-bit shooter, it's certainly high in the running. When it was originally released in 1990, it was getting rave reviews and perfect scores from all of the big gaming publications of the day, and with its recent re-release by Retrobit, there's been something of a renewed interest in Gaiares. Well deserved, if you ask me, because I love this game. The story in Gaiares is actually pretty fleshed out when compared to its shooting peers from the early 90s, and it's everything you expect from a game like this. It's set in the far-flung future, there's a war going on between Earth and an army of space pirates, and of course, you are the pilot of an experimental new starfighter and the planet's last hope to fight back against the invading hordes from across the galaxy. Also, there's something about the Earth being hideously polluted and a space federation threatening to blow up the sun if you're not successful, so the stakes could not be higher. Luckily, you've been given control of one of the most badass starships to ever grace a video game. The gameplay in Gaiares is exceedingly simple, even by shoot-'em-up standards, whereas games like Gradius or R-Type feature a ton of different power-ups and customization options. That's all largely absent from Gaiares. The only real power-up in the game is a shield power-up that allows you to absorb a few hits before losing a ship. Instead, all of your weapons powers can be stolen from your enemies via the Taz, which is a little satellite that follows your ship's movement. You deploy it at an enemy, steal their weapon, and boom! A whole new weapon system to enjoy, and the more you do this, the more powerful your weapons become, or at least until you swap it out for something new. Aside from your fire button and Taz button, you also have a button dedicated to changing your ship's movement speed, and that's it. No screen clearing super bombs, no collectible power-ups, no transforming or altering your ship in any way. It's just you and your wits, and whatever weapon you can take off your enemies. That's all well and good, and the Taz system is a cool gimmick, but what really makes this such a great game is the fact that the gameplay itself, the controls, the challenge, it's all amazing. The controls are so tight, and the gameplay is very smooth and responsive, which is especially important because this game can be very difficult, so there's not much room for error. I myself have played this game off and on for about 2 decades now, and I finally feel like I've gotten pretty decent at it. But yeah, be forewarned, if you've never played this game before, it will kick your ass from pillar to post. The icing on the Gaiares cake are the nice visuals and sound design, which again were eliciting some perfect scores in 1990, and it's easy to see why. Gaiares features some very detailed and colorful stages in a wide variety of settings, and there's a lot of scrolling, various objects flying around in the foreground and background, and some absolutely massive and very elaborate boss battles. Also, the cutscenes sprinkled throughout the game have that classic anime look that is still very pleasing to look at to this day. The soundtrack as well is just fantastic. Lots of high energy music and really catchy arrangements to get you into the action, and compared to some of the less impressive sounding Sega Genesis games from the time, Gaiares is something of a masterpiece, so it's no wonder it had GamePro losing their minds at the time. Indeed, whether it's the visuals, the sound design, or the gameplay, Gaiares is definitely one of the best 16-bit shooters ever made, and not even Captain Bad Nasty could argue with that. And she wanted to make pollution nukes, which seems unreasonable anyway. Unless you want the sun to explode, it is your duty to play and beat this game. It is, after all, #1. It's Gaiares, and it's awesome.
Welcome to another edition of Show Review Den. If you're anything like me, you might have thought 1998's Parasite Eve was simply Square's answer to Biohazard. That may be true to an extent, but Parasite Eve is actually a video game adaptation and sequel to an award-winning novel of the same name, written by Hideaki Senna during the Japanese horror boom of the late 90s. The novel spawned a popular film, a manga series, and of course the 3 games we know today. So let's take a look back at the original for the PlayStation 1, Squaresoft's first M-rated title. Does it hold up? Does a mitochondria lay dormant inside its human host only to then cause them to spontaneously combust and attempt to take over the world? Yes. Directed by Takahashi Tokita, Parasite Eve delivers one hell of a ride with terrific character and atmosphere. Coupled with that to this day is a refreshing spin on the survival horror genre. Taking place over a 6-day period, our protagonist, New York City police officer Aya Bree, investigates the mystery behind humans spontaneously bursting into flames, and upon discovery of the culprit, begins tracking down the monster responsible, Eve. Eve aims to eliminate every last human on Earth, to produce and populate it with superior organisms who can control and manipulate their own DNA. Now, I don't want to spoil the game's story if you have never played Parasite Eve, because this is arguably the best story in a survival horror game to date, at least from a storytelling perspective, and you really should experience it for yourself. The way the story unfolds is akin to all those awesome late 90s police thrillers, my favorite kind of movies in a genre that's truly missed in my opinion. You even got that old great police chief trope whose ass is gonna be had by the mayor. To top it off, the New York setting is awesome, and it's made even better by being set during the holiday season. That's right, Parasite Eve takes place around Christmas Eve. Square is no stranger to experimenting with interesting battle systems, and look what these mad scientists have done. They combined Final Fantasy and Biohazard, and it's sick as hell. When encountering enemies, you're locked into a small area, and the game features real-time combat with an ATB, active time bar, dictating the time the player must wait to take another turn. Meanwhile, you have to run around and dodge enemies, often easier said than done. Offensively speaking, the range between you and your enemy will determine how effective you are, so you want to maintain that sweet spot. There's a variety of guns to equip, and you can unleash Parasite Energy, the game's form of magic, to either attack, buff, debuff, or heal yourself. You can't rely on it too much, however. While the Parasite Energy does recharge during battle, the more you use it, the slower it refills. You can upgrade both your weapons and armor, and what's really cool is all the perks you can alter with the tools, giving you things like a higher rate of fire or a nice fat stat boost. Like Resident Evil, you'll be searching for clues, solving puzzles, navigating your way through a lot of great, creepy environments, and running into all kinds of enemies. And I really dig the enemy variety here, and how each monster requires its own special approach. Parasite Eve absolutely kills it in terms of presentation as well. Jaggy graphics aside, I love the game's style. Now, I did record the footage on PS3, where you have an option to add some smoothing, and it does help what is an otherwise very jaggy game. But for a game that oozes this much style, who really cares about the visual fidelity? The pre-rendered backgrounds here are killer, and the cinematic camera angles are so cool and something you would never see a game attempt nowadays. The atmosphere never lets up during your investigation, which takes you all around New York, from Central Park to the National History Museum, a hospital, a brief stop downtown in Chinatown, and of course, is any game truly complete without a dank sewer? Another thing I adore about Parasite Eve is these scripted sequences, and again just how stylish they are. Like these scenes in the squad car and the way the buildings just whip by on the reflection. The music as well is nothing short of brilliant, composed by Yoko Shimomura, from the eerie atmospheric tones to the more catchy adrenaline pumping melodies. This is music you'll probably want to put on and listen to outside the game. Or if you're like me, you'll find yourself sitting idle, listening to that sick loop over and over. This survival horror game might not just be the one with the best story, but also the one with the best music. So what's not to love about Parasite Eve? This game has it all. All these top-notch elements coming together to make an absolute marvel in the horror genre. If you like horror even just a little bit, this is a must-play game. Parasite Eve has an awesome cast of characters and great dialogue, storytelling, cool monster designs, and a unique RPG twist to the combat. The killer atmosphere has you going all around on a cold, snowy Christmas Eve. It does not get much better than this. Parasite Eve goes way beyond just being Biohazard with an RPG twist. It takes so much style and influence from my favorite genre of movies, thrillers, and mixes that all with my favorite genre of video games, making this not only one of my favorite survival horror games, but one of my favorite games of all time. It's Parasite Eve, and it's excellent.
Hey everybody, Jim here. Welcome back for another edition of Show Reviewkin', where today we are taking a look at an awesome game indeed. It is Batman, and we have a very special guest reviewer today. So everyone prepare yourselves, because here comes Mike Tindo.
Here comes a new challenger!
Oh boy.
What?
You're taking a real risk here.
What are you talking about?
Doing a collaboration with Kid Shoryuken?
Oh, actually he rebranded. His channel is now called Mad Panic Gaming.
Even more reason to worry.
Wait, why? I'm so lost.
Guys, relax. I asked for this.
You know his viewers probably hate cringy skits, right?
Oh yeah, that might be an issue, huh?
You better move on to the review fast before they figure out how the unsubscribe button works.
Fair point. Okay, here we go. Batman on the Nintendo Entertainment... Wait a second. This is...
Yeah, that's right. Let him have it. Zoom in on the face, and...
Batman on the Sega Genesis?
Growing up as a Nintendo loyalist, Sunsoft's Batman was a go-to action platformer with killer tunes, impressive graphics, and bat-tastic fun, based on the Tim Burton Batman film from 1989. But now, all these years after spreading my console wings and exploring other consoles I never owned as a kid, I've come across a plethora of licensed games that were on other 8 and 16-bit systems that I had no clue existed. One such example is today's game, Batman on the Sega Genesis. How does it fare compared to the more famous 8-bit version? Pressing start, we're given the choice to begin the game or go into the options. Thankfully, Sunsoft allowed us to bump the stock of lives up to 7, which is good because you're going to need them. I completed the game on normal, and it took me about 2 hours total with one game over, so the challenge to bump up to hard is there for advanced players. Now, unlike the NES Batman, there's very few cutscenes in this game. On the NES version, there's cutscenes similar to the Ninja Gaiden games, but here, we just start the level right away. This version of the game is a bit more faithful to the movie, like Stage 2 when Batman knocks Jack Napier into the toxic goo to turn him into the Joker. But sadly, we never get to see this transformation via a cutscene. Batman's got a bit of a flat-throwing punch that doesn't have the impact of the NES game's Bat Fist, but he has some additional smooth moves thanks to advanced jump mechanics, and honestly, these kind of break the boss fights in many ways. Pressing the jump button, then pressing again will send Batman into a tuck and roll jump. You can use this like a jump attack in a Mario game and hit the back of an enemy to hurt them. This makes boss fights way easier. Batman also has a duck and kick move that helps with sliding opponents. Holding down the attack button will supposedly block, but I was never able to connect successfully with this defense mechanism. Stage 2 has this spot where the pipe bursts and you're supposed to grapple onto what's left of the pipe, but I initially had a lot of trouble with it for some reason. Pressing up and the grapple whips you up to the higher ground, and you'll need to use this to ascend to platforms. Batman can also drop down by pressing down and the jump button, but keep in mind that when the screen scrolls, you can't go backwards, which can cause you to miss certain power-ups. However, there's a glitch in one of the stages that allows you to drop back down and get infinite 1-ups, which definitely helped me finish the game without losing all my continues. Yes, there's limited continues, so if you run out, that's game over. Aside from the hand-to-hand combat levels with various goons that, I don't know, they look like they're pulling out a pen to ask for an autograph, you'll also come across gun-blasting baddies and these hopping dudes. Speaking of hopping, Batman will be able to hop into the Batmobile and Batjet, or Batwing? Batplane? I don't know, I'm not sure. I think it's just the Batwing in this movie, so we'll go with that. The Batmobile levels feel nice and tight control-wise, and the addition of collecting and using homing missiles really helps with the stronger vehicles. The Batwing level is rough to get through, as your hitbox increases immensely when you try to steer up or down. Half my deaths were caused in this level just by trying to dodge the attacks of the helicopters. There's a total of 6 stages, with 2 of them, stages 4 and 6, being comprised of 2 sections. You'll go from Gotham streets to the Axis Chemical Factory, then to the Flugelheim Museum, before taking to the streets again in a 2-part stage. Stage 5 is the flying mission, before finishing the game with the final 2-part stage at the Cathedral. There's a lot less cybernetic sci-fi stuff than the NES game, and most bosses reflect this as well. From beefed up henchmen to swordsmen and more, the bosses are much more down to earth here. Graphically, this game reflects the darker tone of the movie. Shadows fill the streets and skies, and while I think the background animation on the NES game was more impressive overall, this game is no slouch in that department. I especially dig the animated cutscene where Batman escapes with Vicky Vale and he flies right at you like a Ninja Turtle through time. Get it? It's a reference to another licensed game. Get it? I'm so sorry, Jim. I absolutely love the soundtrack on this game. It's provided by Sunsoft's legendary Naoki Kodaka. It's got mostly brand new tunes separate from the NES game, aside from a jingle or two. From the smoky prologue tune to the somber booming epilogue and staff roll, this game fully utilizes the Sega Genesis's YM2612 FM-based sound chip to craft some real bops. Here's a few of my favorites. You really can't go wrong with Sunsoft's Batman on the Sega Genesis. The combat takes a bit to get used to, but this one is a quick little challenge that will get you doing the Batoozy. Way better than the arcade game of the same name, but a bit lacking compared to the platforming and combat thrills of the NES version. This iteration sits somewhere in between the two. With a 1-2 punch of killer tunes and quarter-munching vibes, Batman is one of the better licensed games on the Sega Genesis.
A huge shout out and thank you goes out to Mike Tindo for joining me for today's review. I've been enjoying his videos for over a decade now, and it's great to finally have him on the channel. And I have to also thank him for choosing a game that I hadn't really given much attention to before now. The reason being is that I'm a big fan of Batman on the NES. It's actually one of my favorite platformers, and if there was another Batman game that wasn't going to be as good, I just wasn't interested. But there's a lesson there about not being biased, because while I don't think it holds a candle to its NES counterpart, I really enjoyed playing through Genesis Batman. The thing that impressed me most, though, wasn't the gameplay, though that too is good, and I'll talk more about that in a bit, but man, does this game have an awesome soundtrack. I should have expected as much, considering that Sunsoft games always had great music, but this seriously competes with the soundtrack of the NES game, and is actually one of the better soundtracks on the Genesis. It really impressed me. I can't say the same for the visuals, though. They're not bad, mind you. They do closer match the dark and moody tones of the film, but I much prefer the vibrant colors of the NES game, even if it's more reminiscent of Batman Forever than it is '89 Batman. Now to the gameplay, which is solid and fun. It's kind of similar to the NES game, and that it's an action platformer, but definitely leans more into beat-em-up territory. The controls are responsive, and the challenge minus the Batwing stage is fair. But yeah, I definitely agree with Mike on this one. The Batwing stage was pretty frustrating. The Batmobile stage, on the other hand, was really cool. It controlled great and wasn't nearly as frustrating. The one thing that I thought was really weak, though, the boss fights. Once you figure out the jump attack, or if you've saved up enough batarangs, the bosses are pushovers. Sometimes literally, even the Joker can be steamrolled in a matter of seconds. Other than that, though, a fun game indeed that makes good use of the license and has a killer soundtrack. So thank you again to Mike Tindo for joining me today. Definitely go and have a look at his channel for a whole lot of retro gaming goodness. Thanks for watching, everyone, and we'll see you next time on Show Reviewkin'.
Awesome!
Everybody, Jim here. Welcome back for another edition of Show Reviewkin', where today we are taking a look at an awesome 8-bit platformer. It's called Shatterhand, and we have a very special guest reviewer today. So everyone, give a nice warm welcome to Brazzle the Gamer.
Do you enjoy punching bad guys and robots and walls? Were you an angsty teenager like me? I got in trouble for punching my locker in high school once and had to pay to fix it. What were we talking about? Oh yeah, Shatterhand! And not what happened when I punched my locker. The badass NES game that people constantly call a hidden gem. And man, it really was a hidden gem. It's a great game, and I honestly had never heard of it until I started collecting. Today I'll be talking about this game because Kid Shoryuken from Mad Panic Gaming asked me to contribute to his channel, and I was more than glad to accept. Shatterhand was developed by Natsume and published by Jaleco in '91, so it was a late NES game with kind of silly box art, so it's no question as to why it wasn't more popular back when it was released. But had I seen this game in person as a kid, I would definitely have wanted a copy. Look at these graphics. This has to be one of the best looking games on the NES. The backgrounds are incredibly detailed with some really cool parallax scrolling effects. And even the enemies are detailed and colorful. Most games don't go into this much color detail on enemies. Like, the developers at Natsume went an extra mile here. The music is awesome too, really hard driving and catchy. It may not be like Castlevania or Mega Man levels of memorable, but it's still really good. and the sound effects work so well here. The main character's punches sound like they have so much weight. So the game is set up in a manner similar to a Mega Man game. There's an intro level, 5 main levels that you can choose the order to take them on, and a final level containing the end boss. It's definitely not as big as a Mega Man game, but the challenge is about the same. Shatterhand isn't NES hard in the way Ninja Gaiden or Contra is. It has a pretty fair challenge, and with unlimited continues, it gives you a lot of chances to figure out enemy patterns and power-up locations. The only real detriment to a game over is needing to start a level over at the beginning, which isn't a huge deal because these levels aren't massive by any means. Outside of punching everything in sight, you also have to collect these little icons that you can punch that will change between an alpha and a beta character. After picking 3 of these icons up, you'll get a little robot helper buddy that will have a different weapon based on the combination of alphas and betas you collected. Collect the same combination a second time while your robot is active, and you'll get a mech suit for 15 seconds that gives you invulnerability and a large fireball that rips enemies to shreds. It's very useful for boss fights if you can time your collection of power-ups just right. The boss fights are all very pattern-based and may take some time to figure out and beat. Some are vastly easier than others. This guy who sticks to the wall and jumps back and forth is super easy to beat once you figure out you can hang on the chain wall under him and punch the crap out of him a few times before he jumps to the other side. The samurai robot looking thing, on the other hand, had a pretty predictable pattern, but his attacks can be super hard to dodge. I had to get the mech suit to take him out. Your character cuts a pretty quick pace, and the controls are mostly really tight. There are a few areas here where his jump feels a little floaty, and you may not jump exactly where you need to, but it's forgivable, and you mostly do get used to it. As for the story, I don't have a manual for this game, and there is no dialogue in the cutscenes in-game, so beats me what's actually going on. But for a game like this, what does it matter? I know that in Japan, this game was based off some pre-existing IP, so it's essentially a really good licensed game. The last level does have quite the difficulty spike because you have to make it through several of the previous bosses before taking on the final boss, and checkpoints are few and far between. But there are numerous health pickups in this level, so if you can get to that next health pickup each time, you'll have an easier go with it. Admittedly, I still haven't beaten Shatterhand. I need to really put some time into that last level, but I still have a blast every time I play it. Shatterhand is a great game that absolutely deserved the hidden gem title it got years ago. It's pricier these days and more well known. It's not really a hidden gem now because so many people know about it, but it doesn't matter. It's a cool game one way or the other, whether you've heard of it or not. You probably want to hit it up on emulation instead of trying to get a physical copy because, again, it's pricey as hell. But still, definitely check it out. I want to thank Mad Panic Gaming for having me on. Thanks a lot for the opportunity. Later.
Big time thank you and shout out to Brazzle the Gamer for joining me today and for picking not only an amazing game for this review, but also a game that, once again, I'd never played before. As Brazzle said, this was a late NES release and was mostly overlooked at the time, and by the time I became interested in game collecting, it was already a quote-unquote hidden gem and kind of hard to come by. Not to mention expensive. If you were hoping that maybe the Famicom version was a more affordable option, think again, because even in Japan, this is a pricey and elusive game. On that note, Brazzle was right about something else. In Japan, this game is referred to as Tokyu Shure Soul Brain, and it is indeed a licensed game based on a fairly short-lived TV series of the same name that featured costume superheroes defending Japan from a variety of monsters and sinister villains, very similar to something like Power Rangers and other Super Sentai series. So the Famicom game has some graphical differences from its NES counterpart, but other than that, It's the same game, and what a game it is. Despite never having played this game before, it quickly became one of my new favorite Famicom action platformers, right up there with classics like Batman, Gun Deck, and Ninja Ryukenden 3. This is, like any good side-scroller should be, simple, challenging, and fun. The premise is very easy to grasp. Just beat the hell out of everything that stands in front of you, collect power-ups, and take out a boss to complete the stage. The controls are tight and responsive, the challenge is fair, and the inclusion of the variable power-up system is enough to help the gameplay stand out and add a little extra depth without overcomplicating things. Simply put, this is an excellent game that'll be enjoyable for anyone with a love for its 8-bit peers. On top of that, this is indeed one of the best looking Famicom games I've ever played, with some very vibrant and detailed backgrounds and some pretty cool cutscenes as well that definitely bring to mind games like Ninja Gaiden and Vice Project Doom. And it must be said that this is an excellent soundtrack that reminded me of why I like chiptunes in the first place, which isn't surprising since this game was developed by Natsume, and if nothing else, their games always featured great music. So whether it's Shatterhand or Soulbrain, this game is awesome, and I highly recommend it to retro gamers with a love for action platformers. Thank you again to Brazzle the Gamer for joining me today. He has an excellent channel with some especially good retro game reviews. Go and check it out for more great gaming content, and as always, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next time on Show Reviewkin.
Hey everybody, Jim here. Welcome back for another edition of Show Reviewkin, where today we are taking a look at an awesome 90s arcade game. It's called Dyna Gear, and we have a very special guest reviewer today. So everybody get comfortable, because here comes Xander Scullion.
Here comes a new challenger!
Hello everyone, Xander Scullion here, and I want to thank Jim for letting me on his channel to talk about one of my favorite arcade games released in 1993, Dyna Gear. When it comes to the story of Dyna Gear, you're playing as Roger, who is an intergalactic space cop in search of an evil criminal named Gustav. Now, Gustav jumped back in time to the prehistoric era, so that leads you back in the time of dinosaurs in the search for justice. But of course, it's the gameplay that really makes Dyna Gear shine. It's a game that's categorized as a side-scrolling action platform, but can also be considered a run-and-gun to certain elements, but it's actually a mix of all those genres that turns out to be a pretty decent title with some simple mechanics. But well implemented and explained, it's a pretty frantic game, full of action from start to finish, and you must attack our enemies and dodge their attacks and jump on platforms throughout the game itself. This game can be fairly simple mechanically, and very responsive as well. From axes to mallets to swords, Roger has a lot of weapons on his arsenal, and you also get help from Wolf, one of the, I guess, leaders of this wolf tribe, and you can also play as Wolf if you're playing this 2-player co-op. It has a pretty good level of replayability, as certain parts and paths you can choose from, and that's pretty surprising for an arcade game of this stature. Listen, Dyna Gear has so many things I absolutely love about a video game. When I'm playing a platformer or a run and gun, I unintentionally try to speedrun it. I don't know what it is. I like to go to point A to point B as fast as possible. I'm not trying to collect all the coins. I'm not trying to collect all the nooks and crannies and find all the secrets. I just want to blast through the game as fast as possible and not die. It's a personal preference when I play these games that Dyna Gear actually congratulates. While the music can be kind of forgettable, I absolutely love the 2D hand-drawn sprites. Listen, I look at Dyna Gear and I see a long-lost Saturday morning cartoon. The folks at Sony really missed the mark with this. And you may be asking yourself, Xander, this game sounds amazing. Where's the catch? Are there any issues with this game? Yes. Ultimately, and ironically, the things I love about Dyna Gear are also its downfall. Because upon playing Dyna Gear, as you progress through the game, you go from run and gun, spraying everything, just killing everything, to almost like labyrinth stages. And this kind of game, going through a maze, you're going to find yourself kind of losing the momentum of the trajectory of trying to get to point B. And it kind of makes you lose the immersion that you originally had, say, with the first 3.5 stages. But it's not an incredibly difficult game. If anything, it shows you that a game can be fun without being too difficult. But I think the biggest flaw of Dyna Gear is the fact that it was never released on consoles. Unfortunately, this is an arcade-only title, and what a shame, because I could have definitely seen this on the Super Nintendo or Sega Genesis, but '93 was a weird time for gaming. A lot of marketing was going more towards the 3D polygons, and a lot of folks on the Western markets were seeing 2D hand-drawn sprites like Dyna Gear, in my opinion, a beautiful game, as something of the past. So unfortunately, the only way to enjoy this game is downloading something like MAME, or if you're lucky enough to have an arcade around you and they have Dyna Gear, I cannot recommend this game enough. It's freaking awesome. But yeah, Dyna Gear. It's freaking awesome. You guys definitely need to check it out. And also, I want to thank you again, Jim, for letting me on the channel and talk about this game. And as always, guys, happy gaming.
Big time shout out and thank you to Xander Scullion, not only for joining me for this review, but also for choosing such a kick-ass game, because just like with Mystic Warriors, this is an early 90s arcade action game that I'd never even heard of, let alone played, and from the second I hit the start button, I was immediately having fun. Dyna Gear is basically everything I love in an arcade game. It's easy to pick up and play, and the objective is very clear from the beginning. Run from point A to point B, destroy everything that stands in front of you, pick up a bunch of point bonuses along the way, and do it as quickly as possible. There's a time limit for each stage, and there's not a ton of time on the clock, so like Xander pointed out, this is a game that encourages you to haul ass and clear stages as quickly as you can. This makes for some very fast, frantic, and sometimes just a wee bit overwhelming gameplay, but it is a hell of a lot of fun. My only regret is that I've yet to play this game with a second player, which I imagine is even more fun than playing solo. Also, yes, there are some spots where the game slows down a bit, killing your momentum in the process, but for the most part, it's balls to the wall, non-stop action, and that's just how I like it. If you've got a spare 30 minutes or so, you can blast through this game and have a great time doing it. The visuals are also quite striking, with some very large character sprites, including some massive dinosaurs to dish out some serious pain on, and there's a variety of vibrant and detailed backgrounds to enjoy, or at least as much as you can, as you sprint through the stage at top speed. The soundtrack is definitely the weakest aspect of the game. The music definitely isn't bad, it's just very forgettable, and mostly drowned out by the constant noise of the sound effects. But if gameplay is all you're really worried about, then Dyna Blaster has got you covered, because it's awesome. So thank you once again to Xander Scullion for joining me today. If you haven't already, definitely go and give his channel a look for some excellent gaming content, and thank you very much for watching. We will see you next time on Show Reviewkin'.
Is it just me, or is 2 the magic number for video games? It always seemed to me that whenever a developer got around to making the second game in a series, they were able to fully realize whatever it was they were trying to do in the first game, and made a much better game as a result. I mean, think about it. Street Fighter 2, Mortal Kombat 2, Resident Evil 2, and Mega Man 2, all of them took the gameplay mechanics, stories, and features of the first game and expanded upon them to make a superior sequel. And keeping with that tradition, we have the Twisted Metal series. The first game was a groundbreaking title that brought to the world the concept of car combat. We were introduced to Calypso, a wish-granting maniac with seemingly unlimited power, an array of colorful characters driving their own personal vehicles of destruction and mayhem, and the Twisted Metal tournament itself, where those same characters would destroy each other and the city around them in an effort to get a single wish, whatever their heart desires, but always with some kind of sinister twist at the hands of Calypso.
You don't have to do this, man. You don't have to do this. I'm sorry about the girl, man. You don't have to do this.
Cross me again, it's over.
That was anticlimactic.
Oh my God.
It was fun, it was chaotic, and it was awesome. But everything that Twisted Metal did right, Twisted Metal 2 did even better. For starters, the story, and by extension the game, is much more expansive. Whereas the first game took place exclusively in Los Angeles, in Twisted Metal 2, Calypso is struck with the idea of taking the tournament global, which means we get stages set in various locations all over the world. Places like Hong Kong, Moscow, and Paris are all now caught in the crosshairs of Twisted Metal. Along with that, the way the story is told in Twisted Metal 2 is much more appealing than the first game, which pretty much only featured still images with lines of scrolling text. There were a bunch of FMV cutscenes filmed when the game's title was still high octane, and they were pretty much finished and ready to go, and they're actually pretty entertaining, if a bit cheesy, but they were given the boot in the finished product. Here though, we get some very cool motion comic style cutscenes that feature some pretty damn good artwork. At the very least, we get to see and hear the characters, which makes them much better by default, but I must say, the voice acting, especially for Calypso, is really good, at least by the standards in 1996, which typically saw some horrendous voice work in video games.
Congratulations! I have granted your wish. Have a great time in the friendly skies.
Let's go! Wahoo! Hey man, this can't be right.
Once again, the tone is sort of a horror comedy, with every wish made being turned on its head in a monkey's paw type of scenario. Come to think of it, Calypso is kind of like Mr. Gaunt in the movie Needful Things, if anyone remembers that. The point though, the storytelling in Twisted Metal 2 is miles beyond what it was in the first game. Storytelling definitely isn't the most important aspect of a car combat game though. It's obviously the gameplay, and once again, Twisted Metal 2 took what was already great in the first game and beefed it up quite a bit. For starters, we get 9 returning vehicles, 2 of them being unlocked with cheat codes, and we also get 5 new vehicles to try out, and most of them would become regular staples in the series. There's also a new boss character in the form of Dark Tooth, which sounds very unpleasant. He's basically the big monster truck version of Sweet Tooth, and he actually could be unlocked using a Game Shark or similar cheating device back in the day, but playing as him would seriously bug out your game. We also get the return of all of the prerequisite weapons from the previous game, a wide array of missiles, mortars, and so on. My personal favorites being the ricochet bombs, because of how fun it is to just fire them off in random directions and see who gets hit first. It's kind of like playing an explosive game of dodgeball. Very fun stuff. Of course, every character also has their own special weapons, and they range from devastating to practically useless, but at the very least, every character can also perform secret attacks by entering certain button combinations.
The best one being Minion's special attack that freezes enemies in place while also blasting them with a barrage of missiles, which is very satisfying, as well as dealing some major damage. So even if a character's stock special attack really sucks, you at least have access to some really cool special moves. The stages also play a major factor in how awesome the gameplay is, because each one is unique and comes complete with a multitude of stage hazards, secret areas, teleportation pads, and of course plenty of stuff to destroy. Most notable being the Eiffel Tower, which gives you access to the Paris rooftops after you blow it up. Or on the other hand, stages like Antarctica, which slowly falls apart as you play, making the battlefield smaller and smaller. And of course, there is the Amazon level, which is surrounded by lava, which begins damaging your car as soon as you touch it. All of these stages are very inventive and fun to play around in, plus in the 2-player challenge mode, you can even play in some stages from the first game as well as a stage from Jet Moto of all things, which is pretty cool. All of those cool features wouldn't be worth much without tight and responsive controls, which Twisted Metal 2 has in spades. The developers wisely made the decision to leave the realistic car physics at the door and gave us something a bit more on the arcadey side, which feels great. Every vehicle has its own stats, of course, and they all handle a little differently, but overall this game is a breeze to get the hang of and is so satisfying to play. Conversely, if you want to see what a car combat game plays like without this rock-solid gameplay engine, just play Twisted Metal 3 or 4, which had to be made from the ground up, and the results were much less impressive. So to sum up, Twisted Metal 2 is everything a good game sequel should be, and it's still to this day one of the best car combat games ever made. It's definitely the best on the PS1 at least. There are other awesome games in the genre that grace the PlayStation, such as Vigilante 8 and Rogue Trip Vacation 2012, which itself uses the same gameplay engine as Twisted Metal 2, but for me, this game is still at the top of the flaming heap and may perhaps never be topped. Indeed, the perfect video game sequel if there ever was one. It's Twisted Metal 2. And it's awesome.
Please, Calypso, you gotta make me famous. Make it so the entire world knows my face.
Your wish is granted.
Hey, don't touch the face.
Nice. Oh, I can see all of them
Hold
now.
on
Hey yo, and welcome back to another Mad Panic Gaming Review. PlayStation 2's Lament of Innocence takes place at the very beginning of the Castlevania story. The origin of the vampire hunt in Belmont's generation-spanning war against Dracula. And it all began with our protagonist, Leon Belmont, a former baron who's been informed that his beloved Sarah has been taken by a powerful vampire and is now being held captive in his castle, a castle full of monsters. It's an elaborate game in the ever-ending night. Like Leon, the 3D Castlevania games up to this point, we're off to a rocky start. But is Lament of Innocence the one that whipped the series back into shape, or does a vampire suck? What is one of the most overlooked games in the franchise just happens to be what I think is one of the best. Hunting vampires has never been so satisfying. I love the way this particular Castlevania is structured. I'm a sucker for a good hub world, and that's what we got here. Upon entering the castle, to your left you'll find a series of rooms that act as the game's tutorial, taking you through the need-to-know mechanics. And to your right, you'll find 5 portals which take you through the game's 5 hellish dungeons, and 5 demons you need to defeat to unlock the final path. Each area has its own elaborate theme, and in traditional Castlevania fashion, puzzles to solve, secrets to uncover, and bosses to fight. Now, it's definitely not the giant sprawling Metroidvania map of something like Symphony of the Night, given how all of these dungeons are separated, but for me, I just love the simplicity of going into a dungeon and then coming back to a centralized hub to touch base. Ocarina of Time does that with its Hyrule Field, Demon Souls and Bloodborne do it, and hell, I guess you could say even Mega Man, my favorite series, does it with its stage select in a way. Don't mistake that simplicity though for a lack of content. There is a ton to sink your teeth into. Each dungeon is sprawling with a slew of awesome enemies, hidden upgrades and secret areas, and some pretty elaborate and awesome traps to maneuver around. The boss fights are great, and I really love this gnarly undead parasite. I guess you could say he's a sight for sore eyes. And you got others like the wicked succubus and the classic Medusa. There's no shortage of optional hidden bosses either, with 3 elemental monsters that reward you with elemental whips, a doppelganger in a water dungeon no less, not to mention an ultra powerful super boss, the Forgotten One, if you're up for the challenge. To take on these challenges, Leon is equipped with the good old trusty whip, and there's just something about the whips in these games, and frankly any game with a gothic Victorian setting, just makes you want to whip it up, doesn't it? Of course, another returning staple are the good old sub-weapons that consume hearts. From axes to crosses to a jar of blue flames, a lot of familiar items return, and a really cool feature is that you can change what they do by equipping different orbs for even more badass abilities. Leon has more in his bag of tricks. You can equip armor and a variety of accessories for perks like converting damage into hearts. You can also equip relics to your gauntlet for some extra abilities like a temporary defense boost or leaving a trail of fire in your wake.
That power is quite something. But I am beloved by the night. You will taste my powers.
I'll kill you and the knight!
The music and presentation here is nothing short of fantastic. Now, Castlevania has always had and been known for incredible music, from Bloody Tears to Wicked Child, and Lament of Innocence is no exception. There's a killer mix of catchy electronic tunes and some classical melodies, all memorable and all perfectly complementing that haunting atmosphere. After beating the game, there's a nice handful of extras to add to the game's replayability. You'll unlock Jiaoqim mode. I'm probably butchering that, but this is where you get to play as Jiaoqim, one of the game's villains. And it's a very interesting mode because it kind of plays like a shoot 'em up. With multiple stances, you'll be flinging swords all around the room and can unleash a giant magical laser beam once you max out your MP. Another addition is Crazy Mode, which is essentially the hard mode of the game, where enemies are much more difficult and you can hold only 5 of an item instead of 9. And beating the game on this mode, of course, rewards you with more items. And last but not least, if you manage to beat the game with Jiaoqim, easier said than done, you'll unlock the almighty Pumpkin Mode, which is basically the same as Leon, but now you're a pumpkin man. And what better time of year, right? Who doesn't like some pumpkin?
Nice costume, butthead. But you're scaring my girlfriend. Now get the hell out of here.
Castlevania Lament of Innocence is a remarkable game that I feel is often an overlooked entry in the series, with an unbelievable soundtrack that goes unheard. It's actually my favorite Castlevania game to date. As someone who's not the biggest fan of giant-sized Metroidvania maps, the more streamlined action-adventure nature here, with just the right amount of exploration, not to mention the hub world and its gameplay loop, makes this the Castlevania that clicks with me. It's got the look, the sound, the combat, and a cool cast of characters to boot. It's a game that vibed with me before I even booted it up. With the awesome box art from Ayami Kojima, it always caught my eye in the game stores back in the day. And all that is to say, this is one game you can judge by its cover. You won't be lamenting Lament of Innocence, because this Castlevania is excellent.
Excellent.
Imagine you had a time machine. You'd be able to travel back to one of the greatest years in recorded history. 2000. The future. But in the past. Once there, you'd of course want to travel to the small town of Jennings, Louisiana, where you could then meet a wide-eyed 13-year-old boy named Jim. He'd be wearing huge jeans, drinking dangerous amounts of Mountain Dew, and he'd practically be glued to his PlayStation. He'd also be happy to talk your ear off about some of his developing interests, those being action films, sci-fi, cyberpunk, anime, industrial rock music, and a big one, survival horror games. Now, stop imagining, because that boy was me, and those jeans were mine. And it was in February of 2000 that one of my all-time favorite games was released, and that is Fear Effect, a game that was seemingly made just for me, or at least the 13-year-old version of me. So let's take a closer look and see what it was exactly that made this game such a masterpiece at the time, and if it still holds up today.
One sphere takes over, the lines of reality blur, making it impossible to tell whether you're playing or being played.
Before going on though, I think a little bit of a history lesson is in order. Fear Effect was published by Eidos, but it was developed by a rather obscure studio called Kronos Digital Entertainment. In their 10 years of developing games, they only completed 6. 2 of them being Fear Effect and its sequel, 3 fighting games that were all pretty mediocre, though I do have some fond memories with Cardinal Sin and a game that I think was in many ways the precursor to Fear Effect, a 1997 PC exclusive called Meat Puppet. In this isometric action-adventure, you take control of the sexy and sassy Lotus, the titular meat puppet of the game. Meat puppets being prostitutes that have been repurposed into assassins, and are forced to carry out the orders of a mysterious benefactor, or face immediate execution. Aesthetically, this game leans heavily into dystopian cyberpunk, and is drenched in a thick coating of 90s edginess. Lots of violence, sexual innuendo, harsh language, and of course, plenty of tood, both from Lotus and her AI helper who doubles as some sort of weird BDSM program. In fact, Lotus is in kind of a gimp suit too. The whole thing has kind of an Aeon Flux vibe to it.
So it's business as usual until I kill the next guy. Then I can open any door I want, break anything I want, or blow up anything I want.
You'll get your fill of violence.
At the time, reviews of Meat Puppet were very mixed, saying that the story and characters were very compelling, but that the gameplay left something to be desired. Of course, you can now play it on Steam and judge for yourself, but the point is, the devs at Kronos obviously had a vision in mind of a dark, sexy, and violent action puzzler set against a cyberpunk backdrop. Fast forward to 2000 and we finally get to Fear Effect, the ultimate realization of everything Kronos was going for with Meat Puppet, only much better than that. It's set in the mid-21st century, and it starts you off in Hong Kong, introducing you to the three main playable characters. Hana, a former prostitute turned assassin and mercenary, Glass, a grizzled war vet and friend of Hana's, and Deke, a pudgy, psychopathic Australian guy. It's kind of all we get on Deke. Initially, the three of them have a plan to kidnap the daughter of a powerful triad leader and hold her for ransom, but it all goes sideways, as these things so often do, and what results is a terrifying, blood-soaked adventure that literally takes them to the depths of hell, or at least one of the Chinese hells. Maybe the hell of being really irritated by puzzles.
Hell of being what? Chinese have a lot of help.
So yeah, the setting, the tone, the characters, it's everything Meat Puppet was, and then some, and it especially hangs on to that edginess. There's plenty of graphic violence, lots of sexual content, primarily from Hana, and more of that naughty language, or at least the word shit comes up over and over again. They really like saying shit.
We'll need to warn Deke. There's a shitstorm coming.
Shit!
Hey, shit on.
Shit!
Oh, shit.
Say shit on shit! Shit!
Shit! King shit or shit?
Oh, shit.
Shit!
Shit in the
Shitty bit! Shitty!
Shit!
Oh, damn it.
Potty mouths aside though, the story in Fear Effect is actually very engaging and takes more than a few surprising twists and turns throughout, including multiple endings depending on the difficulty you complete the game on, and your own preference for who should live and who should die. For 13-year-old Jim, this was all totally badass, and it really appealed to my growing interest in things like cyberpunk, horror, and in particular survival horror, which is exactly what this game turns into. It might not necessarily look like a Resident Evil game, but the influence can definitely be felt when you're playing. In particular, the tank controls and fixed camera angles will remind you of Capcom's earlier survival horror outings, though it's clear that Chronos was at least trying to do something different with Fear Effect. Your health indicator, for example, is referred to as your fear gauge. It's essentially a heart monitor that goes from green to red and is supposed to indicate how afraid your character is, but really it operates the same as any other health gauge, changing color as you take damage. You don't have access to any health restoring items though, instead having your health replenished after certain criteria are met, completing a puzzle for example, or activating a cutscene. Perhaps the most difficult thing to get used to would be the combat. It's kind of odd really. When you have your weapons drawn, you can't actually aim them, but instead, your character will aim automatically when enemies are in sight, so you have to be patient. Firing off your guns before your enemies are in your crosshairs can alert them to your presence, giving them a chance to take some shots at you. It's also really irritating when enemies move in and out of your line of fire, sometimes by leaving the screen entirely, as your character is in a constant loop of gaining and losing their aim. It's imperfect to be sure, but nothing game-breaking. In fact, after a while, it kind of becomes second nature, just knowing where to position yourself and how to be patient to get your shots on target. A pretty cool feature though is the ability to fire at multiple targets at once when you're dual-wielding pistols or Uzis, and if you're sneaky enough you can actually perform some stealth kills too, but only on human enemies. Eventually, when you're facing off with demons and possessed corpses, stealth is completely out the window and you'll be relying exclusively on firepower. And that goes double for the boss encounters. Regardless if it's an attack helicopter or the King of Hell himself, there's no problem a few bullets can't fix. Aside from the combat, the other thing you'll be spending most of your time doing in Fear Effect is solving puzzles. And this is another thing that might give you a bit of trouble, as these things can be pretty cryptic upon your first playthrough. The solutions for most of the puzzles can be found in context clues hidden somewhere in the area, but they require you to pay a lot of attention to detail. They're very easy to miss, and for some of these puzzles, you've only got one shot at them. Get them wrong and it's game over. Although failing these puzzles or failing to navigate certain obstacles properly will result in unique death animations, So if you're anything like me, you'll probably intentionally take a few L's just to see our heroes bite the dust in various creative ways.
I hope you die.
So while the gameplay in Fear Effect comes with its fair share of irritating sections, and the controls do take some getting used to, especially if you don't have a lot of experience with tank controls, this is a supremely enjoyable game once you get your bearings. But I can't deny that the story, characters, and the visual presentation are what stand out most. At the time, there weren't really any other games that looked like Fear Effect. The characters themselves were textured in such a way that it resembled cel shading, though technically it really isn't. Cel-shaded graphics became very prevalent in the years to come, but at the time, this was something of a novelty, and the environments in Fear Effect really stood out for their high level of detail. That's because instead of using pre-rendered images as backgrounds, everything you see is actually a full-motion video clip being played on a loop. It's a little wonky here and there when the background clip ends and then restarts, which can be very noticeable at times, but the increased level of detail looks really cool, and some of these backgrounds are very dense. It's actually the reason that Fear Effect came on 4 discs, even though the game itself is fairly short, but the end result is a game that is very visually striking and was able to provide a more cinematic experience than other action games from the late 90s. When I was playing Fear Effect, it felt like I was playing a sci-fi horror anime come to life, which was exactly what I wanted at the time. So this was a perfect game for me when I was 13, but you can't stay 13 forever though. So the question is this game still perfect for me? The short answer is yes, even though it's much easier for me to admit to its flaws now. The controls leave a lot to be desired, the dialogue can be a bit corny, the quote-unquote edginess can be a bit on the nose sometimes, and the visuals have lost some of their luster over the years. But despite all of that, I still love this game. The story, the characters, and the over-the-top violence and sexual content, the sound design, and again the aesthetics are what really make this game such a joy for me to play. The gameplay itself is kind of just there to fill in the cracks, to the point now where I can just breeze through this game in a few hours just to get a little nostalgia rush and enjoy the story all over again, which I do at least once a year, kind of like watching Groundhog Day. This is one game that I recommend everyone play at least once. You might end up hating it and playing it no more than 30 minutes or so, or you might love it just as much as I do. There's only one way to know for sure. It's Fear Effect, and it's awesome.
Awesome!
Goodbye, my friend. Hannah, delay Yim La Wang until I am gone. Hurry!
When I was a kid, like a lot of other kids in the 90s, I think, I had a mild obsession with ninjas. In particular, I was a big fan of the American Ninja series of movies by Cannon Films, which were a constant presence at the video rental stores in my town, and still pretty cool movies to this day, if you like action schlock. And of course, I'd play any video game that so much as even made mention of ninjas. Classic stuff like Ninja Gaiden, Shinobi, Ninja Commando, and of course, TMNT. They were all great games, and they all featured ninjas as the unstoppable, ass-kicking machines that would run headlong into danger, slashing and bashing up hordes of bad guys, and this was what ninjas were to me at the time. Then my whole world changed when I first opened up a gaming magazine and saw an ad for an upcoming ninja game called Tenchu Stealth Assassins. a game that reportedly was going to feature more true-to-life ninja action. You wouldn't be an unstoppable killing machine armed to the teeth and annihilating everything in sight, but instead you'd be a living shadow, relying on cunning, stealth, and patience in order to quickly and quietly eliminate your enemies before slinking back into the darkness from whence you came. The concept was mind-blowing for the 11-year-old version of myself, and when I finally got my hands on Tenchu, it immediately became one of my all-time favorite PS1 games. It was perfect, but that was 25 years ago. And gaming has come a long way since then, so I decided to go back to this game recently and see if it still has the ninja magic that it used to. Tenchu is an interesting game for a number of reasons, one of them being that this was the first game ever developed by Acquire, probably best known these days for the Octopath Traveler series and Akiba's Trip, but for the longest time all of their games were centered around feudal Japan, ninjas, and samurai. And for a first attempt, it's obvious that there was a clear vision for Tenchu. To the best of their ability, Acquire was going to make a ninja game that made you feel as though you actually were a ninja, out on missions to assassinate high-profile targets and acquire key intel for your masters. In this case, we get to play as Azuma Ninja Warriors Rikimaru and Ayame in service to the powerful but just Lord Goda. All of the missions you go on are in service to him in one form or another. You'll be killing corrupt merchants and government officials, rescuing his daughter, Princess Kiku, as well as taking out rival ninja clans and other operatives who pose a threat to Lord Goda's dominion, ultimately pitting you against literal demons and masters of hell who have designs on taking over Japan and presumably the world. So while the story of Tenchu starts out simple enough, it does eventually take you to some more radical places, and it introduces us to a lot of characters that we'd be seeing more of in future games, including the very badass Onikage, one of the few recurring villains in the series and a rival for Rikimaru. He's kind of like if you crossed a ninja with a member of a Norwegian black metal band, which is pretty cool. The gameplay of Tenchu is fairly straightforward and honestly didn't change very much across its many sequels. In each mission, you'll have a specific objective, usually assassinating a target, but there are some missions that change things up a bit, challenging you to get from one end of an enemy checkpoint to another, for example. Some of the stages are wide open and allow you to head directly to your target if you really want to, while others set you on a more linear path, forcing you into confrontations with enemies along the way. You can simply run up on them and start hacking and slashing, but the real fun of Tenchu is waiting for the perfect moment to strike, catching your enemies when they're unaware, and slitting their throats. You can always tell when an enemy is near and what their status is by looking at your ninja sense gauge next to your life bar. It'll tell you if the enemy has their guard down, if they're on alert, or if they've spotted you. It's only when their guard is down that you can execute a stealth kill, and if you are spotted, don't worry too much about it. Just find a good hiding spot, and in no time at all, your enemies will forget you were ever even there. It's not like a Hitman game, for example, where once your enemies are aware of your presence, they remain on high alert for the duration of the mission. Nope, the enemies here have the memory of goldfish, which makes them some pretty easy targets if you don't mind waiting a minute for their back to be turned. The game definitely encourages you to go for as many stealth kills as possible though, tallying them up at the end of each stage along with some other stats to give you a ranking, with Grandmaster being the highest. Get that and you'll be rewarded with lots of cool bonus items to take with you on your next mission. And these include pretty standard stuff like shurikens and smoke bombs, to more radical ninja magic spells such as instantly disguising yourself as an NPC or spitting some red hot ninja fire. But without a doubt, the most important item in the game is your trusty grappling hook that you'll need to traverse each stage. Otherwise, your mobility would be greatly hampered, because despite being ninja warriors, Rikimaru and Ayame's movement can be pretty clumsy at times. Not exactly the smooth and fluid motion you'd expect from masters of the shinobi arts. And it has to be said that your greatest adversary in Tenchu isn't Onikage or the King of Hell himself, Lord Mayo, but instead it's the camera. You'll be fighting with that thing way more than any of the enemies you'll face. In fact, that's the thing that'll get you spotted and killed in this game most often. The unruly camera and the rather stiff controls, making it easy to lose track of enemies or get yourself stuck somewhere. I always died most often during the boss battles, as these are just straight up one-on-one fights, and that's not really your forte in this game. Again, going back to the Hitman series, where if you can get the drop on them, you simply kill your target when they're unaware. Here though, despite how stealthy you may have been all throughout the stage, you always end up running right up to your target, announcing your presence, and engaging in a duel, which totally defeats the purpose of the whole stealth assassin thing. I'm not going to talk too much about the graphics in Tenchu, because I think it's fair to say that a lot of these earlier fully 3D games haven't aged very well. They're pretty primitive looking, and that's to be expected. But I will say that I still love the character designs, and there are a variety of locations to explore, and the developers did their very best to create a bit of ambience with their designs, which is helped along greatly by the soundtrack, with each stage having a unique BGM that ranges from kind of peppy and upbeat to downright creepy and foreboding, but it all sounds really good and complements the tone the game is going for very well. In fact, that rings true for the whole series. They were never the most graphically impressive games, and the gameplay never really changed very much, but the sound design was always fantastic. So, going back to my original question, does Tenchu Stealth Assassins hold up today as a great game? And honestly, the answer is no. I still love it because I have a lot of nostalgia for it, and I still have the skills needed to work around the camera and the controls, but there have been much better stealth action games released in the past couple of decades. Thief, Hitman, Assassin's Creed, even sticking with the Tenchu series, new players would probably enjoy the sequels on the PS2 a lot more, or better yet, Tenchu Z on the Xbox 360, which lets you create your own ninja, and it featured some really cool multiplayer. This first game is a relic of the past, and I guess that's probably where it should stay. But I'll never forget that time in my life when I was a merciless shadow warrior, a master of the ninjutsu arts, the silent servant of justice.
Sure, the ninja needs to sneak up on some of that dog poop in the backyard.
Anyway, it's Tenchu Stealth Assassins, and despite all of its flaws, it still holds a special place in my heart. My absolute favorite time of year is definitely December. I love the cold weather, the long nights, and of course, Christmas. The lights, the music, the presents, and decorations, they never fail to make me nostalgic for Christmases past. And in keeping with that feeling, I try to watch a good Christmas flick every night of December. And one of my absolute favorite Christmas movies is Batman Returns. Some people have argued that it's actually not a Christmas movie, but that's just nonsense. Christmas is at the center of this entire film. There are Christmas trees and decorations everywhere, and the last line of the movie is Merry Christmas. So yeah, it's a Christmas movie. An untraditional one, sure, I'll grant you that, but still a Christmas movie nonetheless. And despite its dark tone and occasionally graphic violence, it moved a hell of a lot of Happy Meals.
And hamburger Happy Meal at McDonald's for an amazing $1.99. You get Catwoman, Batman's launching Batmobile, or the Penguin. One toy with each Happy Meal you buy your kids.
It was very violent. It was a total attack against kids, the whole movie. Everything that kids love was being used against them.
Like what?
Clowns.
Anyway, there were a bunch of video games based on Batman Returns across pretty much every console available at the time, but my personal favorite is the one on the SNES developed by Konami. And if Batman Returns is a Christmas movie, it stands to reason that this is a Christmas game. Or at least that's what I'm going with, otherwise I wouldn't have a Christmas video this year. But there is in fact plenty of Christmas stuff all over this game. For example, did you know in Finland it's a long-standing tradition on Christmas Day to go out into the streets and beat up the first clown you see? It's true, look it up. That being said, if you're someone who particularly hates clowns, then you'll probably love this game because that's pretty much all you do in it. You beat the brakes off of clown after clown after clown. You punch them, kick them, throw batarangs at them, you slam them into the ground, the walls, you can even grab two of them at a time and bash their heads together, which is supremely satisfying. In fact, that's a good word to describe the gameplay in Batman Returns as a whole. Satisfying. Your attacks feel impactful, the action is fluid, and it's got just the right level of difficulty. It controls more or less like Final Fight. You have an attack button and a jump button, and pressing them together performs a health draining super attack. You can also stun most enemies for a second by hitting them with a batarang, leaving them open for some serious punishment. In 1992, Batman stuffed everyone's stockings with lefts and rights. Hey look, Christmas trees! In between beat-em-up stages, the game sprinkles in a couple of side-scrolling segments where you rely strictly on your batarangs and a sweet Batmobile shooter stage that shows off some killer Mode 7 graphics. Those are both plenty cool, but for the most part, this is just a straightforward and fun beat-em-up, and it's loaded with boss battles. Obviously, there are a couple of fights against Catwoman and the Penguin, but you also get to take on some of the more minor characters from the movie, like the Taser Clown, the Strongman, and that weird guy with the monkey and the Gatling gun. He was always my fave. So this is a super fun game. The only thing it's lacking is multiplayer. But that's understandable, I guess. Batman was flying solo on this one, but I must say, this is a great looking game. The character sprites are huge and detailed, and the backgrounds look really nice too, and include plenty of Christmassy goodness. Even the handful of cutscenes look nice. They use digitized stills from the film, which typically look like crap in most games at this time, but is pulled off nicely here. And on top of that, the sound design, typical of 90s Konami, is excellent. This game pretty accurately replicates the sound of the movie score by Danny Elfman, and the sound effects are unforgettable. Whether it's the sound of punching bad guys, slamming them into the ground, or making them belch, I guess. Regardless, the visual and audio presentation in Batman Returns is truly impressive for 1992 standards. So when taking everything into consideration, this is actually one of the best beat-em-ups of the 16-bit generation, or at least I think so. And anytime I need to get a bit of that Christmas cheer, I pop in Batman Returns, because nothing says Christmas like beating up clowns. Merry Christmas, everyone.